final day of the world's largest FinTech Fest, the Global FinTech Fest, organized by FinTech Convergence Council and Payments Council of India, which are a part of Internet and Mobile Association of India. The fest is presented by the National Payments Corporation of India, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, Reserve Bank of India, and supported by Niti Aayog, Startup India, and Invest India. We would like to welcome you all for a panel discussion on developing fintech solutions across boundaries. We have a distinguished set of panelists joining us today. Please join me in welcoming the moderator, Mr. Vishal Narula, Managing Director, Alvarez and Marcel, followed by our panelists, Mr. Ritesh Shukla, Chief Executive Officer at National Payments at NPCI, Mr. Kagiso Motibi, Head FinTech and Innovation Hub, Financial Sector Conduct Authority, and Ms. Susan Hannestad, Chief Executive Officer at FinTech Mandi. A very warm welcome to Mr. Narula.
Hi, good evening everyone and welcome to this session. I am privileged to be moderating this session in the midst of such stalwarts from the industry, from different walks, and you just heard their introductions. I think we have a lot to learn and we have a lot to ponder upon during this session. What we wish to do is to be able to help everyone understand the scope and the opportunities that exist with cross-border fintech solutions and how they will not just disrupt the world and the economies. They will actually help us create a level of inclusion and uniformity that we may have never thought about before. But just to set some kind of a context with, for you, and especially for those of us who are in India at this point of time, I think the first instance of us really brushing ourselves with fintech came in November 2016 when we went through a demonetization process. Yeah, and it was way before COVID hit us. And by the time COVID hit us, things were rather easy for us to be able to transact because we had already adopted fintech in our individual lives. And not just that, I think businesses had also adopted fintech in a way that they never thought would be existing before. And coming from an advisory background, I can tell you when we speak to clients and when we talk to them about transformation, especially in finance, it is technology in finance, in carrying out transactions, in being able to recording transactions, in being able to meet regulatory requirements becomes absolutely easy when we use a variety of different solutions that get integrated with the businesses. Now extrapolate this beyond borders and assume that you have large conglomerates who are able to use similar technology platforms across borders seamlessly. And just to take it at a level of a totally different disruption, think about it at a user level. If users are able to just transfer money, which has recently become a reality between India and Singapore, freely just using your mobile apps, what would happen? And as many research reports as I read over this, I think there is a very clear and direct correlation between the adoption of fintech at a user level and the GDP of a country, and they both support each other. So countries with larger GDPs have a much higher adoption of fintech, but countries who are developing and have recently started adopting finance technology in their day-to-day lives are showing massive amounts of growth. And India is the second highest in terms of revenues when one looks at fintech today. I think 5 years back in 2016, we weren't there, and the kind of growth that we have seen is thanks to technology, and especially thanks to the kind of payments infrastructure that has been created in India thanks to NPCI, right? Over the next few minutes, we will dive into the landscape of payments across the world, dive into some specific case studies about how India has transformed and taking it globally, what the regulators across the world can do and are facing as challenges, and finally end with what each one of us thinks is going to be the key difference of using fintech in our lives. So here I'd like to start by asking Suzanne, with respect to if you can share with us, where are we moving globally in terms of fintech and adoption of fintech? How is it helping us? Are we there? Is there a long way to go? And who's doing what? So over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Vishal, and thank you for being part of this fantastic event. We in FinTech Mundi, we are based here in the Nordic in Europe. We work very closely with Findexable, and I'm gonna the last report they have on the ranking of the countries, the ranking of cities throughout the world, and just give you a flavor what's going on there. US is at the top. They have been number one, and UK is number two. Those two has been there up for a long time. What we see though is that Asia Pacific is coming in. Singapore is doing great. Australia is doing great. And then we have the Nordic countries. They are among the top, with Sweden, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, and Denmark among top 20. India is 23 and climbing. So what you said, Vishal, that a lot is happening, and we know it's a lot of development in India. Looking at cities, and here we will have a few of the Indian cities coming up. San Francisco, London are top 1 and 2. Sao Paulo, Latin America, is number 4. And then number 10 is Singapore. And then we have on the number 13, we have New Delhi. And on the 20th, we have Bangalore. And then on 23, we have Mumbai. So India is very well represented there. And again, the Nordics, they are among the top 25 cities as well, with Stockholm on the 14th. So that gives a flavor of a good mix between the various continents. Just looking at the European, Stockholm is on 14. We have Vilnius on 11, and so forth. We go down. So the Nordics, of course, is coming and have been leading for quite some time. Another index I would like you to get yourself familiar with is the Global Innovation Index. That's an annual thing. And on top is Switzerland. Number 2 is Sweden. We have Korea, the Republic of Korea, on number 5. Finland on 7, and Denmark 9. So that also gives you a flavor. And I assume India is climbing that ladder quite dramatically with everything that is happening when it comes to real-time payment and so forth. We are into financial inclusion, and we work with MasterCard with that summit, and we made a report there. And again, Findexable was a part of that report. And what we see that is the promotional collaboration is a key thing across governments, development agency, and the private sector and innovators ending the exclusion for good. And then my main insight we saw that is, of course, the new mobile money proposition have the potential to reduce the world's unbanked population by more than a third. Just giving you one company coming out of Sweden is Crunchfish. They offer offline solutions, payment solutions, and I know they are in various places in India as we speak. Then we have another radar that I want you to look into, and that is the diversity radar, the FinTech diversity radar. That is being worked on as we speak, and a lot of insight and surveys has been done over the last year, and it will be launched in the beginning of November. And here, if you see at the percentage of women that is being a founder or a CEO or both, Africa and Asia Pacific is in fact leading in the world. They have 7.5%, which I think is a good one, and Europe is number 3 with 6.9. Something to bear in mind going forward, that we'd always think that the Western society is doing what they think to. So that was my start, Vishal, and of course a lot of other discussions we can continue with.
So that's very insightful, and it's very good to see that we have at least 3 of the main Indian cities quite high up there in the index, as you mentioned. You know, not too far behind Singapore as such. But so are we then summarizing that the world is moving towards adoption of fintech very rapidly, and And how are different countries doing on the outbound side? Do you see all of these developed countries who are high up in the index going beyond their borders, or do you see more developing countries going beyond the borders? And of course, I'd really love to know how India is doing in that.
What we see, though, is in Europe with the harmonization of regulation, and regulation is a big stakeholder when we're talking financial service and fintech. So Europe is doing quite a lot, and mentioning this crunchfish and open banking companies that is here in Europe, like Neonomics, they are looking first Europe and then going towards Asia, and Singapore is a good hub to that. Another aspect is that from the Nordics, there's close to 100 companies that are present in emerging market, meaning Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And we see that, of course, we see the American companies coming out of California. They, of course, are once they've done it in California, they go global. So they will be present all over the world as soon as they see opportunities. And in this sense, with the large population in India, the Indian market is very tempting for all these continents to be part of. So here we are.
So I think with that, I'd like to bring in Ritesh. Ritesh is the CEO of NPCI International Payments Limited, and he's the person who has taken India's indigenous payments infrastructure beyond India's boundaries. And here, Ritesh, I'd like to ask you if you could tell us how much has changed with respect to financial inclusion with the introduction of UPI in India, and what are the learnings that you are using that allows you to take it outside the boundaries of India so easily and so rapidly?
Thank you, Vishal, for the opportunity. Pleasure to be here. When you talk of financial inclusion in India, I think the first thing that comes to your mind is UPI. And UPI has truly transformed the payment landscape in India. It actually reflects in the volumes that are being processed or have been processed on the platform. In 2020, we processed volumes worth 457 billion US dollars on the UPI platform. And this is, estimated to be roughly around 15% of India's, GDP. Now, if you compare it with, 2017, when the platform was launched, the volumes that were processed were about $8 billion. And with $457 billion in 2020, this is a compounded annual growth rate of 285% plus. And this actually shows what has happened. I mean, this is truly transformational, and volumes continue to build. Like for the month of August, we processed about 3.55 billion financial transactions, amounting to about $86 billion. Now, this is what UPI has achieved here in India on the financial inclusion front. If you look at current landscape now, merchants of different sizes across rural as well as urban landscape have now digital payments as an option, so they can offer this to their consumers as against cash dominant society we had a few years back. So this is phenomenal here. We have gone to the deep corners of the country and given merchants, consumers, an options to pay digitally. Now, this feat is a outcome of ecosystem level collaboration. Like it's all actually anchored, orchestrated by NPCI, but everybody has played their role, and the credit goes to the entire ecosystem. In terms of your question around our learnings and what actually differentiates UPI from others, I think we have about 7 or 8 things that actually differentiate UPI from others. One is ours is an API-driven platform, so it's easy to integrate. It is interoperable, unlike in some other markets in the world wherein the payment works within the rails of a particular operator. No, it's truly interoperable here. You can exchange money within different players in the ecosystem. It is real time, so money moves, at least for the consumer, money moves quickly, and there is confidence when you see the money in your bank account instantly. It's simplistic. It runs on aliases, unlike some of the other players who have a complicated way of identifying customers and pushing money through. It truly operates on the open banking ethos. Like you can download any app from a Google or Apple store and connect it post authentication to any bank account in the country and start transacting. So it's truly interoperable. While others are now drawing rules for open banking, we already have done it here, and we've been doing it since 2017. And it can be integrated with multiple service channels, mobile, internet. We also have USSD because when we launched the solution, smartphone penetration in India was about 16%. Now we are touching 50% mark, but we have a USSD channel that works to drive last mile inclusion, and even in the corners where there is no data connectivity. So that's there. Then we have a very, very tight governance and collaborative engagement model that actually allows participants to drive innovation, create superior user experiences, drive good UX to gain traction, and be closer to the consumer. And above all, finally, we are a very diverse country, and we have a multilingual capability that actually allows consumers from across the country to access the platform in their own preferred language and imbibe on the benefit that it delivers. So I think this is what has happened here, and we are very proud of achieving this in collaboration with the overall ecosystem.
So Ritesh, you have taken UPI beyond India's borders. Can you share with us when you like you put it, a truly interoperable mechanism, when that's taken across the borders, is it easily and seamlessly integrated and adopted in different borders, different countries? What kind of opportunities and challenges do you see there?
So Vishal, we are trying to do two things here. One is the consumers that we have here in India who are using UPI powered apps across the ecosystem for P2P and P2M transactions. So we are trying to expand that landscape. So for instance, for P2M, we are trying to create acceptance across the borders of India to ensure that the consumers who are using these apps here with full confidence also get the same user experience when they go overseas. So that's on the P2M side. For P2P, we are looking at forging network-to-network partnerships so that the cross-border remittances happen the same way the domestic P2P payments happen. So we want to bring in value there for our consumers on the speed, transparency, as well as the financial aspect of it. So that's for expanding the current network. But we're also equally interested in collaborating with the central banks, with the governments, in internationally to create something like UPI and deliver same level of benefits and drive inclusion there, and help commerce at a grassroots level, rural, urban, different landscapes. So these are things that we are doing on the UPI landscape.
I was about to ask you about commerce at a grassroots level. Good, you touched upon it. So, are we saying it will be possible for businessmen in India to pay for whatever goods and services they import or export to other countries through a UPI network? So, is it going to be possible to use UPI for business transactions as well?
So in the first phase, we are looking at more consumer transactions. But once you establish connectivity, once you put in the rails with the necessary regulatory approvals, sky is the limit. UPI is a robust and scalable platform, and we are demonstrating it with the performance here. So that's what I would like to say here.
So on that note, I would like to ask Kagiso, from a regulator's perspective, Ritesh just mentioned it depends all upon the regulatory approvals. You have seen a real burst of FinTech cross borders, and being you are in South Africa, being based in the African region, I would have been the beneficiary of a lot of technology as well. What kind of challenges have you seen when you get cross-border fintech solutions in Africa, and is it really easy or is it really difficult to be able to monitor them from a regulatory perspective? So and I would just like to probably not ask too many questions, but also as a regulator, what would give you sleepless nights because of this?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Vishal. So absolutely, I think in the African context, we have seen the rise of digital platforms that are looking to operate cross-border, and their entire premise is really to solve for financial inclusion. So across many countries in Africa, banking penetration is not that high. And so in order to fill this gap, we have started to see fintechs and interestingly also telcos actually look to address that gap in the market. And so as a result of that, we've seen a rise of digital platforms, fintech-based digital platforms. And in South Africa specifically, banking penetration, interestingly enough, is actually high. So customers have a current account that they can store funds in and transfer funds to. But the issue is more around financial deepening. So beyond just having an account to be able to transact on, consumers are underinsured, consumers are not saving enough, and certainly consumers are also not able to access funds, particularly consumers that are non-traditional in nature. And so as a result of that, platforms have come in and looked to fill the gap, which has been very exciting because the fact that they're leveraging non-traditional data to understand customers in ways that traditional financial services providers don't typically engage in, that's meant more have been included. So we've actually been excited by this development. And so we tend to look at this from a two-sided perspective. So on one hand, we obviously look at the benefits and we want to amplify the benefits. So as mentioned before, the financial inclusion through the use of non-traditional data to better understand customers. That's something that's compelling for us, and we certainly want to promote. The extent to which these fintechs are driving personalization through the use of data, so meaning products are better matching customer needs. That's also something we find quite compelling in many of the propositions we're seeing. And so that's also something we want to drive. And the improvement in convenience. So obviously, because of the digital nature of these distribution channels means you can reach more customers. And then ultimately, the use of data driving affordability. So you can price better, you can price specifically, you can be more targeted. So that's the approach we take on one hand, to look at those benefits and see to what extent can those be amplified. But unfortunately, there's also some concerns, and a lot of them are contextual. So what we've often found is that in some cases, the digital literacy levels are not sufficient to really roll out these products and obtain informed consent from customers. And typically, we find that some of the innovators, they're not really undertaking in fit-for-purpose consumer education that educates their consumers to a level where they can actually meaningfully participate in their platforms. And given the fact that the relationship is often underpinned by the use of data, which evolves as algorithms learn more about you, that is quite a sophisticated and evolving relationship. So if the customers about how that plays out, that can also lead to problems. So we are concerned about that. Another issue is just around data ethics. So data really being used that could potentially be used to discriminate customers or could lead to decision biases that exclude. So that's another area that we're looking at, particularly black box algorithms, where the fintechs themselves do not understand the algorithms they're running, let alone be able to control them. And the other part is just really around anti-competitive behavior. So once the customer has been acquired, the inability for them to switch or opt out. So various propositions designed to lock in a customer and essentially prevent them from being able to enjoy alternatives. So those are just some of the concerns that we're certainly engaging platforms on in order for those risks to be addressed. And I think one other risk maybe also to touch on is the cross-border nature of these platforms oftentimes means from a regulatory perspective, it's very difficult to hold them accountable if they're not licensed in your jurisdiction. So oftentimes, if we want to enforce or investigate something that's happened, it becomes very difficult to access the data, do a digital audit trail in order to ultimately identify what the issue is. So those are some of the concerns that we're certainly looking to address so that, as mentioned, the benefits that platforms bring to the table can actually be amplified. And then I think Ritesh also touched on another point, which is really around the enablers to some of these platforms scaling. So certainly in the African context, what we're seeing is that smartphone penetration and data penetration are indeed key enablers. And they're not yet, often in some markets, they're not yet at the levels where we really see some of these platforms scaling in the ways that they need to. So oftentimes, where we do see scaling of mobile money, for instance, it's often on a feature phone type environment. And so until device penetration and data penetration, which is driven by affordability around data, is increased, we think there's still ways to go before we can actually see true cross-border scaling in the African context. So those are just some of the themes, Vishal, that I would like to share with the forum.
No, thank you so much for sharing those, Kagi. If you have to give 2 or 3 pointers about how is it going to be possible to make it safer and in the right context or fit for purpose, as you put it, for fintech solutions to be applied in geographies with the kind of financial literacy or digital literacy that may not be at par with other developed countries in the West. What would be the 2 or 3 things you would ask for, especially from, say, the community which helps in creating more fintech through investments or through creators and like organizations? So for example, if you have to ask something from Suzanne and Ritesh specifically as to what would your asks be from the point of view of creating more financial inclusion but safe finance.
Sure, Vishal. So what we've done is we've created, and I think this is prevalent in many jurisdictions as well, we've created a sandbox facility that allows us to essentially take a closer look at a lot of the innovations that are being proposed. And in that way, then you can get quite granular in interrogating the specific use case in order to surface what some of the risks are and then get specific advice. Because it's quite easy to be generic, but I think we tend to find with fintechs is the use cases tend to differ and the propositions are very sophisticated. So you actually have to be quite granular in looking at unpacking what the proposition is, how it interfaces with customers, what the customer journey looks like. From that perspective, you're then able to pinpoint. If you're going to educate your customer, given the nature of your customer journey, these are probably the key touch points where you want to inform them of the service you're offering. This is how you sustain that information flow or keep that information loop going. So it's really about, obviously, number one, we want to promote customer education, but it has to be fit for purpose for the customer journey that's there. I think the other thing we tend to engage on is certainly if you are using data, if you are using non-traditional data, what is the data ethical framework that governs how you make decisions off that data? So that's often also very much use case based. So we often look to have conversations around that in order to see ultimately how that data ethical framework shapes customer engagement. So those are the big things that we tend to look at. And then other things definitely, and Ritesh touched on it as obviously advantages of his platform, but I think issues such as interoperability, issues such as business continuity, if your platform relies on external services providers, to what extent do you have business continuity practices in place should those service providers fail to provide services to you? And then also lastly, just the extent to which customers can opt out. That's also another area we tend to look at when we're engaging with platforms in order to mitigate the risks of anti-competitive practices. And then lastly, just the cross-border, the extent to which should something occur, can one retrieve data on a cross-border basis. So those are typically the themes that we look to unpack. But rather than approaching it generically, we typically like to do it through a sandbox mechanism that then allows us to actually look at the specific data and then based on that, advise the fintech on how they can mitigate those risks so that the benefits, so customers enjoy the benefits of their platform.
So, Susan, in this context, I would like to ask you, do you think it is going to be possible to have across the globe, will it be possible to have a unified platform of sending and receiving payments altogether? And will it ever be possible to solve these issues about digital literacy, about securing payments from a technology perspective, or making sure that these platforms are not used for, say, financing terrorist activities, not used for money laundering, and so on and so forth? And if yes, can you share some insights about how you see this happening at smaller levels, and you believe there is a larger play at possible in the next few years? You seem to be on mute.
Thank you for that question, Vishal. A lot of meat in that question. Or questions. I will start with the regulation here, because everything is based on the rails, and then you need the regulations from the territory or the holding. And here I think the whole world should cooperate together, so we have the same type of standards that we're building on, having cross-border payments or whatever we are working on to it. So from the European side, the harmonization across all the countries that is in Europe has been a tremendous work for payments, for investments, for insurance, for AML, and so forth to it. And if you don't have that regulation in place, it's going to be hard for the AFS and so forth to look into, is this good or isn't it? So that needs to be in place first. And then you can work on that, having all those regulation in place, harmonized across and we know India is doing quite a lot in text coming from Europe. Is a hub that the other neighbor countries is looking to have this. So that's a good and the same is happening eventually in Africa too. We have been working with the African Development Bank, and they also admit that there needs to be some harmonization of regulation in that continent as well, along with the rest of it. And on that sense, US is lagging behind. So in that sense, I think Asia can take a lead together with Europe to make this along with Africa to it. There's a lot that can be done to have financial inclusion and opening up and so forth. And what we see is that the Western society, they have taken it step by step in Southeast Asia in particular, skipping generation. Africa is doing the same, skipping generation. You don't have to go and do all the steps, because that's history, and then go to the next one. And we see so much creativity using the smartphone. And I so agree with Kagiso that data is the critical. Make sure it's not hampered, and make sure that you can utilize this in a commercial way, because the data is like gold, and you want to use that in a good way. And then the rural area is probably the biggest challenge, I think. Cities all over the world, they tend to have a fairly good network when it comes to the internet. So in that sense, but the rural area is the challenge, and that goes for the Western society as well, including emerging markets. So there are some infrastructure things that needs to be in place, and then the creativity from the fintech can utilize that, and then go much more faster, and then make sure that we can get real financial inclusion, not only at the account like Kagiso is saying, but the product and services that is beneficial for the account holder to it, and it's fair and square and so forth. And then once you have competition in these spaces, then you take down the cost to the benefit of the consumer or the businesses.
So, Ritesh, if you come back to you and understand how having an API-driven interoperable payment system can be applied across the world, Do you think it is also possible to use the same kind of system to be able to improve supply chain financing specifically? And if yes, how? Because everything is related, everything is data driven. When it is across borders, it is also possible to understand the nature of the payments, the payers, the payees, the frequency and the volume and nature of transactions in that sense. Do you also see supply chain financing becoming easier with the development of such solutions?
Certainly, and that's what some of the fintechs are doing. I mean, uh, if we look at the advent of digital payments, I mean, uh, we have more and more information on the receivable position of merchants. We have more and more information, on their business turnover and things around it. So, and this all can be used to kind of explore lending propositions, and that would actually enable supply kind of chain. And this is what I mean, we're doing this in India, and we are very hopeful that when we go overseas, when we create or collaborate to create UPI like solutions in international markets, I think this is something that will also help in those help those economies drive commerce at grassroots level. Because in the developing world there is a lot of entrepreneurial talent at a grassroots level. What they are looking for is market access and an easy way to receive money, right? And if you get something on the ground, then you are opening the doors to development. You're opening the doors to driving parity in income, and you are creating employment opportunities. So a solution like UPI, API driven, driving inclusion can really change the game. And that's what we are looking at when we reach out to partners or prospective partners globally. That's our proposition, that this is not only to drive inclusion, this is also to generate the employment, support fintech incubation, and things around it.
And do you think uh, when we talk about inclusion, is it only about more number of people coming onto a technology network for making payments, or does it also help in improving other parameters of inclusion such as poverty, gender inclusion, and so on and so forth? Can you share some examples? You've actually been at the heart of taking the UPI across Indian borders, and especially in countries where major impact can be done. If there is some story that you could share with us on how you see this really making an impact, it would be.
So I think a platform like UPI can deliver 360-degree, government's agenda. And what a government is interested is in, like, one is financial inclusion, we all talk about. Then there is also direct citizen welfare that they are looking at. They're also looking at cash displacement. They're also looking at employment generation. A program like UPI can deliver all this, even gender, inclusion and things around it. And I'll give you an example. In my previous assignment in Middle East, I used to see that a lot of women who are not full-time business owners but part-time business owners, they would go to platform like Facebook and Instagram and sell, and but they will struggle to collect money. I mean, because there's nothing like UPI there. But here, I mean, if you see, people can women from their homes can solicit their products or solutions, whatever they cook, like handicraft or things like pickle or something. They can retail it on their site, and through UPI IDs they can collect money. So that's the power of UPI. And if you walk in any city or village in India, you see QR code hanging outside. That's truly transformational, and that's what it keeps us motivated. And that's, I think, the magic that UPI as an ecosystem has created here in India.
I completely agree. I think the hanging QR codes are a testament to be able to use your phone to be able to transact anywhere and not have the risk of any theft. If you're in a remote place or anything of that sort. And I feel this is particularly more relevant in the places where there is a lower level of literacy or lower GDPs in India. So, Kagi, so can you help us understand over the last few years since the time fintech has its boom, and African region is always a beneficiary of investments and technology, because everyone wants to capture that market because it is so fresh, right? Can you help us understand, apart from just having users use mobile phone for making payments, what is the real impact that a beneficiary region can make from more financial solutions, and not just products, more financial solutions coming from across the border? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, just unmuting. So I think, yeah, that's a really great question. So I think the low hanging fruit has definitely been around payments, but what we're starting to see is use cases that are looking beyond payments. And really, this is to address financial inclusion in a deeper way, because besides just the ability to transact, transfer funds, and store your value, certainly there's other needs that are unaddressed. So, so what we're starting to see is mobile money apps or super apps starting to come to fruition, where they're really looking to address how you insure. Well, the insurance need, essentially. They're looking to lend on an alternative basis using data, and also they're looking to drive or democratize access to investment, which has typically been really accessed only by sophisticated investors. So that's the solutions that we're starting to see, and they're all really integrated into a platform, either a super app or a mobile money solution. And the telcos actually are at the forefront of this. So typically, for consumers as a hook, what they typically provide is some means to drive e-commerce. And what this then is meant to achieve is that consumers are then meant to keep their funds within the app or the mobile money environment. And then through those transactions, they're then looking to help them insure some of those goods. And then on the merchant side, on the other side of the platform, that's where you start to see supply chain or working capital finance coming to fruition. So they get the data around how what volumes they're doing, what their working capital is looking like, and then based on that data, they're then able to extend solutions, lending solutions to those particular merchants or small and medium enterprises. And this tends to be a gap in the market at the moment. So banks typically don't have the appetite to actually lend to small and medium enterprises and merchants, often because they do not have the financial information to actually lend them. However, because the platforms can actually see the volumes in real time that some of these merchants are actually doing, they're able to then base their lending off of this data. So we're starting to see a lot more use cases coming to be, which is great, because ultimately I think it allows us to get a lot more deeper in our efforts to not only address the non-banked, but also to address the underbanked. So I think that's what we're starting to see, and I think from that perspective, we're only going to see more of that innovation coming to be.
Thank you so much for that. I think excellent perspectives being shared. What I take away, is that we've just about begun in using technology when it comes to creating a unified payments kind of a world in that sense, right? And it can only be possible through technology. So while a lot depends on regulators to be able to develop frameworks that allow different countries to interact and make transactions seamless using technology and make faster payments. Faster payments would mean more assurance on trade. It would mean lower costs of transactions, and it would have a very high level of assured level of trade to be carried out. I think the same will also be true from a consumer's perspective. We still see so many consumers, and being in India, who, while appreciating the fact that it is very easy to be able to make payments using your mobile phone for anything, everything that you want to do, right from buying groceries to be able to settle hospital bills, or even make payments to a counterparty for large financial transactions, because it is fast at any point of time, is increasing. But there is always a fear, and that fear is because of the security. So I believe that security regulations and go hand in hand with the development of the solutions to be able to create a very secured and faster adaptability. At the same time, I think it is also important for incumbents, the people who are developing these payment solutions and using technology to be able to build financial products, to ensure that there is enough amount of digital and financial literacy amongst people, so that they feel secure themselves. That, I believe, is an investment that the business community needs to make, to be able to upskill and bring up the level of literacy with respect to technology and finance, with the people, as common people have to use, especially consumers in that sense. With that, I would just like to summarize, and then with each one, I think, as personally, I believe that it is an extremely important turn in our history, because this is where we are at the brink of truly addressing poverty, inclusion, and economic growth. Three very important factors, three very important SDGs in that sense. So from the point of view of helping different companies develop these solutions, I'm taking away some very, very important points, with the commitment to the business world and to regulators, that we will ensure that there is a safer and faster, more seamless adoption of financial technology to be used from an inclusion perspective. Ritesh, if you want to share some last words, and then we could go to the rest as well.
Thanks, Vishal. No, I mean, I would like to, close by saying that, with uh, at NPCI International, we are all, set, and we are ready for collaboration internationally to, deliver what we have delivered in India, operating at great scale with complete interoperability using open source technology, and we are. Very excited about this, and we look forward to repeating this feat in other markets. Thank you.
And Suzanne, from any last few words from you?
Yeah, I think open banking will be a trigger for digitalization going forward. So you can take down cost and, of course, have the rails. And I believe that SME side, which is very underserved, will ramp up. And like Ritesh was talking about earlier, once you have the digitalization with the fintechs, you grow the GDP and the economy and so forth to it. Sustainability and financial inclusion goes hand in hand. So I will end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kagiso, any last final words?
Yeah, so from our side, I think as regulators, we certainly welcome many of these financial innovations, so much so that we've realized that the pace at which these innovations are hitting the market has required us to move from being reactive to much more proactive and collaborative. And that's how we then rapidly promote some of the benefits while rapidly also mitigating some of the risks. And this can happen quickly so that we don't end up stifling innovation. So certainly from our perspective, that's the main thesis of how we engage. And we recognize also that it's an ecosystem approach that's required. So there's several players involved. And I think ultimately for us also is making sure that we direct especially from a policy perspective, we direct the financial innovators towards solving and addressing real concerns that consumers and enterprises are facing. Because I think if that is their true north, I think that's where you start to see jurisdictions benefiting, and you see a lot of the leapfrogging that Suzanne was talking about.
I completely agree. And I think this has been a very, very insightful session. Thank you for sharing so many great points, Ritesh, and also personally very proud of UPI in that sense. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you, Kagiso, for joining this. And I really enjoyed talking to you all. Over to Jivisha.
Thank you so much. Those were some great insights on developing fintech solutions across boundaries. Thank you, Mr. Vishal Nirula from Alvarez and Marcel, for moderating this discussion so well. I would also like to thank our panelists, Mr. Ritesh Shukla, NPCI International Payments Limited, Mr. Kagiso Motibi from Financial Conduct Authority, and Ms. Susan Hannestad from FinTech Mandi for taking time out to join us today. We hope you all enjoyed being a part of the session. We would also like to thank our supported by partners Central Bank of Kenya, institutional partners Reserve Bank Innovation Hub, the World Bank, UNCDF. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us at Global FinTech Fest. Please stay tuned for the next session. Thank you.